this tool update video, I'm going to take a look at a tool I have covered before, but has received some significant updates, so it's worth taking a look again. And in this video, it is the turn of JetBrains Writerside, a JetBrains IntelliJ-based IDE specifically for technical writing. So let's see what's changed. Well, the most immediate thing that has changed is it is now standalone instead of just a plugin for IntelliJ. And if I switch over here, you'll also see, of course, it has an about screen because it's now standalone. That makes sense. The preferences for the plugin now exist sort of spread out all over the preferences. So things like inspections, things like the natural language settings here for grammar and style and spelling, etc., etc. And that's most of the areas where things have changed in the application as a whole. So that was the changes to the overall application. Now let's have a look at some of the new features and some of the changes to existing features. One of the new features that has been added is support for OpenAPI and Swagger specs. These are commonly used in technical documentation to show API specs, and many tools offer the potential to render them in some kind of user-friendly way, and Writerside now offers that too, with a couple of interesting twists on the usual way that other tools handle this. So you could see I have a spec here, and it's included in the file structure here. This is an OpenAPI file. You can use this API-doc tag and then set a path. And as always, if you start typing inside the tag, you will find other attributes available. So I've just removed a few things there because by default it renders everything. There's actually not that much in this spec. It's a relatively small and simple spec. And you can see the different endpoints available, which I think is just 2 in this case. With this is kind of how you'd expect to see these sorts of API specs rendered, to be honest with you. You have an overview, you have a response and a path, and also request parameters if they exist. Where things get a little bit more interesting is you can actually start to filter. So in this particular case, I'm looking at this one particular endpoint, so the Planet ID endpoint. And you can also filter just to the method if there are multiple methods for an endpoint. And then I can override the request and sample data that is in the spec. So if I look here, we'll have some of the default things here, but it could be that we want to include in a particular language. So here I'm actually doing this. It's the same in this particular case, but you could see here I've defined 2 samples. One is JavaScript, one is JSON. So I can actually override the default examples that are in the spec to something that suits the documentation perspective. And that's for the request. You could do the same thing for the response as well. As you can see, it takes a similar pattern there. So that's quite cool. You can use the spec as a basis, but then override it for your individual use cases in certain documentation contexts. Another useful feature that has been added, which is quite popular in a lot of documentation tools these days, increasingly popular, also one of my most popular videos, I need an update, is support for Mermaid markup. And you can actually add Mermaid markup and thus render a diagram, that is what a Mermaid is, using either Markdown or Writerside's custom semantic markup. So to show the same example, this is with the semantic markup. And there we go. Once you're inside the tag, it's basically the same as normal Mermaid syntax. In fact, this is just a code block, and the Mermaid support for the language has been added. So the markup is pretty much the same as if it was any other sort of code. And this is shown by if you do this in Markdown instead, it's just a code block. Hence, there was actually no change there. Maybe just to prove the point. So we should see the same diagram twice. Something else that people like to add to certain types of documentation is mathematical expressions. Now, for those of you who have never really had to do documentation with lots of complex formulas, you might think, why is anything special for that? Well, often you actually use an old, but a language I actually really love called Tech. You might have heard of LaTeX, and that is very good for formatting specific mathematical formula in a way that mathematical formula might look. You know, the kind of square root signs, the lines where you have a divider for division, that kind of thing. And Writerside now also adds support for that by default. Similarly to the Mermaid example, it's actually just a code block that adds support for tech. And yes, it's TEX, it's pronounced tech. This is a decades-long discussion, but that is how it's said. So I'm not going to go there right now. There we go. And you can see exactly the same equation twice. This is the tech syntax, and we've just added support for it here. Another new bit of markup that's been added is a TLDR block. This is perfect for the increasing amount of us who don't have the time to read everything and just want to know what something is before we dive in deep. And of course, you could do this in a multitude of different ways, just an intro, summary, that kind of thing. But Writerside is basically all about using semantic markup as much as possible. So you could just have a paragraph, but why not have a specific sort of paragraph, something like this? And then this means, of course, which is one of the other aspects of Writerside, that you can then selectively render blocks in different situations. Maybe you don't want a TLDR block in online help, but you do want it on the website version, for example. I'll dig into that in a moment. Let's just have a quick look at that bit of markup first. Everything usually follows a particular pattern here. It's a tag, and you can see we get a little summary as we hover over it. And then inside that, you can have whatever you like, really. And it gets rendered in this little block, basically. This actually gives us an opportunity to look at some other markup that I don't know if it's new or not, but I had noticed it before. And that's for a shortcut, which gets rendered like in this other little box. So this is keyboard shortcuts or a UI path, which indicates something, you know, like in a menu you might be clicking. As with anything else, this is just rendered a particular way by default, but you could change this. This only works in semantic markup. There is no Markdown equivalent, but as you can see, this is a Markdown file, so you can mix and match things together. That's not a problem. Another common pattern in documentation tools is a section overview page. So this could be, for example, a series of Markdown tags, and you have those in a navigational tree, but you want to have a page at the top that explains what the section is, maybe has a kind of table of contents on a page instead of in the menu. Many tools, for example, Hugo, offer features to do this, and Hugo does it automatically, which is sometimes it's an advantage and a disadvantage. Sometimes it can be a bit fiddly. And Writerside also offers some special tags and features to handle this manually / automatically, shall we say. Let's have a look. So you need to create a new topic. It is a new page after all. I think the easiest way to get started with this is actually use the template. We can see it here. There we go. And this is a topic file. We can see this is the most important tag that opens everything, the section starting page. You have a title and a description. And then, much like many other things in Writerside, because it uses this semantic markup, it expects certain things to be present. As you can see, it's sort of XML-based. You have a spotlight. So these are topics that you can feature at the top, for example. You then have primary here, so other multiple topics here, and you can see we just reference the topic as a URL. We're getting errors because, of course, these topics don't exist. And then you have different icons you can add here, summary text. You can see how this is all getting rendered and a title. I've just stretched this out so you can see these topics as cards here. We have a getting started primary section, and then a secondary section, which again is highlighted differently here. And equally, we have references to topics. There's nothing filled in here. It's just the placeholder text with titles, etc., etc. And then you have like a miscellaneous section down the bottom here. And then we also have kind of like a I don't know what to call this, like not even a secondary, it's kind of like a supplementary section, a place where you can just put links, groups of links, which are grouped by the title here. And also further down, it gets narrower, etc., etc. So I think beyond the opening tag here, the title, the description, and then a spotlight, a primary and a secondary, everything else is kind of optional, but those are the things it demands, possibly even just the primary and the secondary, actually. I'm not sure if there's a feature to auto-generate some of these based on your existing content. That's not something I've come across yet, but it may exist or it may exist in the future. So as you're starting to see, there's a lot of complex markup tags that we could use. Some of them are quite complicated, and some of them are potentially hard to remember. There's a lot of autocomplete going on in the editor, but we don't always know what we want to know what to start typing to get the autocomplete. There are some ways that Writerside can help you, and this is with templates. And if there are templates that it doesn't have that you use yourself quite regularly, you can also create your own. Now, of course, to begin with, you don't really know what's going to be available, and you can actually find this inside Settings, Editor, Live Templates, and then you can see what's available. There are a bunch of them, but the ones we're interested most of all are the ones inside Writerside, and you can see the syntax here. I think I will try this code tabs one because there's sort of a lot going on in there. So then all you have to do is inside of a file, start typing, you start getting the autocomplete, and then you just hit tab, and then you get the template. And of course, if you want to add your own, then we can just come up to here and then create a new template and then fill it in, add the abbreviation, etc., etc. We can also just copy an existing one as well. When I last looked at Writerside, I also looked at it alongside Grazie. I'm not 100% sure what's happening there. Grazie was more of a writing assistant for improving the way you write. Writerside is kind of more the functionality, the tools around that. But Writerside does have a few bits and pieces built in for helping you especially improve the structure of your writing. And that is important in the context of Writerside because, as you've seen, it uses very structured markup. You've seen it appearing as I've been doing things already, but let's look at it more specifically. This is called inspections. For example, if I remove this, we will get an inspection up here. I don't entirely know what the difference between showing it here or here is. Also, you do notice that here you sort of get assistive text as well. So add an H1, for example. But say, for instance, I don't know, for some reason you don't want a header, you can go into inspections and you can see a whole bunch of them here, all relating to Writerside and other things as well, Markdown as well, and toggle things on and off, change the importance of them, change the scope of them, etc., etc. So there's a lot of control about what you can have as inspections there. Writerside supports two different file types, a Markdown or its own custom topic file extension. But Writerside has recognized, I think, throughout its development process that many of us in technical documentation are using Markdown. Let's not get into arguments over RST or ASCII doc. We're just going to stick with the topic of Markdown for now. So it recognizes a lot of people have a lot of existing documentation. And you could just sort of move this in, but there is a new handier way to get existing Markdown content into Writerside as well. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. So for an existing project we already have open, we can just click the plus, add a local Markdown file, find it. What should we go for? I have to think of things that are not using weird variants of Markdown. And you select it from the folder. I'm going to select that there. Copy any media. There is no media in this case, but we'll do it. And yeah, there we go. So that's just been added and it's copied the file across. You could also do it from a new project. So we'll do new project, import from Markdown. We again just go and select that folder and jump in and pick what we want to actually use. Hit create, open that in a new window. And again, we have the same thing here. And that's it. And that is covering most of the updates to Writerside. Probably not everything. It's been a few months since I last made a video on it. I'm also interested to know what's happening with Grazie. Should actually take a look at that. That kind of one is almost more interesting to me as a maintainer of language linting tools. But Writerside is the tool that has had all the most major updates for now. Head on over to the website address you can now see to find out more in the changelog and how to get hold of a copy of Writerside as a plugin or standalone, as I've been showing it, and sign up for their mailing list, etc., because it's an EAP still, it's rapidly changing, it's an interesting tool. There's not really many IDEs, as it were, for technical writing. There are a couple of others. I have a few others I'm working on videos for that are also new, so watch this space. So it's nice to see. It's nice to see a specific tool for tech writers. I'm still not 100% sure of how much I will use it, especially when it comes to the building process. And you can go back to my old video to see how that works. But I like the fact they're working on it and that someone is thinking of us poor tech writers. That was an update on JetBrains Writerside ID. I have been Chris Chinchilla. You can find out much more about me at chrischinchilla.com. Please subscribe or leave a comment if you like what you've seen. And thank you very much for joining me, everybody. Take care.